Welcome to Clear Conversations, Entrepreneurial Legacies with your host, John Sleeting, an executive partner for Clearwater Capital Partners. Join John and his guests on this exclusive journey behind the scenes of extraordinary entrepreneurial families. In this series, we will dive deep into the stories of John's guests, who generously unveil the paths they've walked, the challenges they've overcome, and the wisdom they've gained along the way. Throughout these conversations, we explore their achievements beyond mere recognition, disclosing the distinctive perspectives that have shaped their entrepreneurial journeys. We hope you enjoy.
Hello, and welcome to Clear Conversations, the Entrepreneurial Legacies series. I'm your host, John Sleeting, and today I'm joined by David Saporta. David is a founder of businesses, a CEO of businesses, and in particular today, we're going to dive into a conversation where he came in as a chief financial officer alongside of a family that was the majority owners of a significant enterprise, ended up in the chief executive officer chair role, and how he worked in business, how he worked with the family, how he worked with his own family and children, and the way he finds purpose to live out his life and live out his belief system on a day-to-day basis. He's a finance undergrad from the University of Illinois, MBA from Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management. He's got a great business mind and a huge heart for making a difference and leaving an impact in this world. So join me and we'll engage in this great conversation. David, thank you so much for being with me today to have this conversation. And in our preparation, we talked about this concept of entrepreneurial legacies, and you have this business background, and we'll talk about the business and working with families and the CFO, president, CEO roles that you have. And then we spent a lot of time talking about legacy and what does that mean and how do you think about legacy? And we joked out of the gate, you're like, well, I don't like that word, right? For certain reasons. And so as we start, I really want to come back to, okay, well, how do we redefine what this concept of legacy is? So thank you for being here, and let's dive right in.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So legacy, what does it mean?
Well, as we had some discussions on that, for me, I tend to not like what that word means as far as how it relates to me individually, as opposed to what I'm trying to accomplish. So I'm more interested in the result of my work as opposed to the legacy of my name or how it's related back to something I created. As a Christian, it's very important to me that my activity is producing fruit, spiritual fruit, not so much just trying to create something that I want for my kids to continue on with or for their kids to continue on with, but rather doing the work that God has told us he wants us to do. And hopefully my activity produces results that further his purposes. And so to me, that's more of having impact. And maybe I'm mincing words here, but I'm not so concerned about me living on beyond my lifetime in any way, or me getting certain credit for something that's been created, whether it's good or not. I'm just more concerned about having a result that goes on regardless of my name or regardless of my family. And the people that come after me in my family do not have to do it the same way or do the same thing, but they need to figure out what that means to them and go after it.
So for you and your belief system and living out your belief system, right? And I think you would think that everyone should be encouraged to do that. What do you truly believe? And are you living that out? And sometimes, right, there's the ease of life or the challenges of life that come into play to say, here's what I really believe. But in certain cases, I live maybe differently than what I say I believe. Yeah. And then you mentioned this, the fruit, right, of the work of the tree. Here's fruit that comes from that. Translate that back. What does that mean to people that might be listening that don't necessarily even share the same worldview?
Yeah, I think we all have to be careful. It's easy for us to justify what we're doing as the right thing to be doing, or that it's good, or that we're producing good things. And in some cases, I'm sure we are, and we can measure that in a lot of different ways. Ultimately, because of my faith in Jesus, I have to go back to, am I producing fruit of the Spirit? It doesn't really matter what I'm doing or how good I think it is, or even how good the world thinks it is, is there fruit being produced that highlights who Jesus is and encourages and attracts people to that? So every so often I have to step back and say, okay, am I being more joyful? Is there more love in my life? Am I kinder? Am I at peace? Are these things being brought out so that people can actually see that, as opposed to, hey, here's the things I'm doing and those things themselves are great, but yet I'm not producing any fruit myself. And
Right.
if somebody was just to come see who I am, I don't look any different than anybody else. And so if those things aren't connected and that's not happening, I have to question,
Right.
what are my beliefs and what am I really doing? And am I just convincing myself that the activities I'm doing are good?
Right. Right. And so, and some people, the concept of the ends justify the means, right? And you're saying,
Exactly.
well, the ends don't justify the means in terms of the pursuit of growth in a business, the pursuit of wealth creation, the pursuit of the means to get there is important, if I'm hearing you correctly. How you live that out, how you approach that, how do you deal? So in a very practical way, how do those means, right? How does that get lived out when you're dealing with customers you're dealing with, suppliers that you're dealing with, staff members that you might be dealing with? How do you actually very practically just live that out?
Right. Well, I do believe that God wants us to live and operate our lives with excellence. I mean, that can honor him. We have to be careful. I have to be careful, not thinking that, okay, making money or being more wealthy or having a bigger business or having bigger scope of what I'm in charge of is somehow going to allow me to do more for God. It's easy to convince myself of that, hey, if I have more money, I have more resources, I have more people that are listening to me, I'm going to be able to do more for the kingdom. And so I can justify my pursuits in some of those things because I think that's going to be the result. But yet along the way, I don't look any different than anybody else. And I'm not really being salt and light in the world. I'm focused on really fulfilling the needs I have as a human being, a sinful human being, and not really the purposes of God. So it doesn't mean they can't both happen, but I have to be very careful along the way that I check myself. And so when I'm dealing with clients or vendors or whoever, that they see something different. Doesn't mean I'm not still going for an excellent result. I'm not still trying to be successful. I'm not still trying to achieve a certain objective or conquer a certain challenge.
Yeah.
But it's important that they see that I'm doing that in a way that is good, but that who I am and the way I deal and the way I process things is different. And it isn't just like everybody else. And so I think they see that and hear that more than me even just talking about Jesus in my work.
Right.
So
listeners might be, listening right now and so far into it, they're like, okay, does this guy work for a church or some ministry? But you work for, a little bit of what I'll call a little bit more of a rough and tumble type of business segment that wasn't so easy to live that out. You have, president, CEO, CFO roles in your background, but let's focus in on where you spent a big block of your career, coming in as the CFO, moving into president, moving into the CEO role at Road Ranger. Because that isn't an easy business to have been in. So first of all, can you frame a little bit, what was the business? What was the industry? How were you operating, the scope and scale of what it is that you were working with?
It was a privately held retail petroleum company. And I say was, it still exists in name, but under different ownership now. But so in the beginning, there was a lot of gas station convenience stores throughout the Midwest. We kind of transitioned into a focus of truck stops and travel centers. And we're successful in that. It was not a consulting business. It wasn't a service industry. It was really lots of hourly employees, over 1,000, hourly employees. We served a lot of different areas, a lot of different types of neighborhoods, as well as interstate truck drivers. We sold cigarettes and alcohol and all those kinds of things that I at times often had a struggle with, but that was the kind of business we had. And a lot of money involved, a a lot of different players involved, a lot of
Right.
very wealthy families involved in that industry, in the truck stop industry that we dealt with and had a lot of partnerships with. So that weren't always talking about, spiritual fruit or how do we further the purposes of God. So yeah, but that can be true anywhere. I mean, some of the people I've worked with in ministry, do a lot of work in poor areas, let's say. And so you can see the need. And in a lot of cases, the people in those areas are asking for help in a sense. They know they need something. A lot of times in business, especially where there is resources and wealth and things like that, there's a lot of self-sufficiency and there's a lot of darkness that people don't even realize they're engulfed in. And so, okay, this is where I'm planted. This is what I'm doing. How do I bring light to that?
Yeah.
Especially in a place where people feel they're in charge and they're in control and they have everything they need and they can run the world,
Right,
so
right.
it's a very different vineyard, so to speak, of where you're going to do your work.
And do you think a little bit of that, just self-reflection of what you just captured, right? In terms of the ability to do whatever comes from what I'll call the deceitfulness of wealth, right? The fact that, okay, I could buy my way out of something, right? I can solve that problem by putting money at it. Do you think that's a little bit of the root of what maybe has the risk of creating a self-view, a self-impression of being, I don't even say above the law, right? But it's kind of that mindset of saying, no, I'm capable of doing this because I've got this stash of wealth.
Yeah, that can cause us to feel like we can make our own rules. And part of what makes us successful as entrepreneurs or as business leaders is the not having boundaries that are too tight on ourselves. We see a lot of potential and we feel like, hey, if that doesn't work, I'll just change it. I can do whatever I need to conquer what it is I'm trying to conquer. But I do think that what we have to be careful of, especially as successful people in business, is a lot of times we really don't have a faith that we're going to be taken care of, that we're going to have provision, that we're provided for by God. And so we feel like we have to create our own comfort. We have to create our own certainty about our future. And we believe money can do that for us. So we can be independent. We can have the things we need. We can have a good life. We don't have to answer to anybody. And really, we're denying letting God take care of us. Doesn't mean we're not supposed to do anything or not be active and just sit back and let him provide. But a lot of times I found for myself that I was trying to convince myself that going after all of this and having everything was good. But in reality, I wasn't really trusting God to take care of me.
Okay.
And so I wanted
Trust
to
yourself.
do that myself.
Yeah.
And it was very easy to convince myself that, hey, I'm going to use all these resources to further his purposes. But what I was really doing was making sure I wasn't insecure and worried about my future.
Right. Now, in the approach with the family that own the company, and you're in the CEO chair, right? So you have an obligation and a challenge, a charter to yourself regarding you're in the CEO role to go off and grow this business with excellence from a profitable approach. And yet you bring your entire self into that work and how you want to be handling, again, the employees or the customers and the suppliers in. Well, what was the relationship back? Because now you're serving the family in terms of their wealth creation through this significant asset that is the business and creating value back for them. Was there tension in that? How did that work out? Did they share the same worldview and how you were approaching what you were doing with the responsibility of basically growing the value of the business?
Yeah, fortunately, the founder who I got connected with was a strong evangelical Christian and was trying to change the world for God's purposes, primarily through wealth creation and doing things with those resources. So we had a common platform in that regard, and we had a lot of discussions about this very stuff we're talking about, which was good. So yes, we had a common purpose in that regard, but we also had a common goal of growing the business and becoming more successful. And so the way I approached it really with him and continuing on with the family after he passed at some point, which we can talk about a little bit more, but was to just make sure he always understood that I was about the same thing he was. We're trying to get to the same place. Sometimes it's going to be the way he does it. Sometimes it's going to be something I have more influence on in terms of how we get there. But it was, taking a pie and just making it bigger, and we could all share in that.
Yeah.
And trying to be aligned and motivated, not only spiritually or from a business sense, but financially with him and the family.
Yeah.
So if they're happy, I'm happy. They're sad, I'm sad.
Right.
We have the
Things are
same
up,
thing.
they're up
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. There was no disconnect with how we were doing and how we felt about how we were doing. So that took some work, but was able to get there. There was also a trust that had to be built up in terms of, hey, look, I'm going to be transparent. I'm going to be genuine. My passion is really to do the right thing, to be successful, to get to where we're trying to go to. I don't always have to have the credit. I'll argue with you if I think it's wrong. I'll agree. I'll support you if I'm not sure.
Right.
Let's just do it together. And so that obviously doesn't happen overnight. But if that truly is what you're about, and you can humble your own ego in terms of following the family and what they want sometimes, and making sure you're providing what they want, but not doing it at the cost of the sake of the business. You can come in when you have to. And I was able to develop that with them. And so even when the founder passed, and then the family and the estate had that ownership transferred to them, and I had a common aligned type ownership with them as well. So we were aligned that way. They knew that already. They knew that they could trust that what I was trying to do was going to be good for them too.
Right.
So that worked. But again, that took some time, and wasn't
and the very
easy.
front of it is you were introduced, right? And I'm going to come at this as I did in a recent conversation and kind of building on this. This family was the founding family, right? They had a majority ownership and control of the business. They looked to a non-family member in you to take over the reins as the CEO. And you were the first non-family member that served in that capacity, right outside of the family. So that dynamic that came into play, I want to come at it from both your lens, but also encouragement back to, families that are out there, right? If there's families out there in similar situations with their businesses and they're looking at non-family member CEOs to come in and run, what encouragement, what advice would you be giving them to be thinking about this topic? And then individuals such as yourself that might be in dialogue with a family, right, to take on that exact role. What are the flags? What are the red flags, the green flags, the yellow flags as you look at that from both of those chairs to say, here's what's going to make this work, right? Here's what the good recipe is. And here are the danger zones that maybe you've even seen or talked to colleagues about.
Yeah, I mean, neither side of that equation's in total control of the outcome. Both have to participate. And I touched on it a little bit, but speaking from the family side, looking at someone who's a non-family member to come in and run the business and protect their wealth and grow it, I think it would be difficult to have something that's been established and been around for a while and just bring somebody in from the outside to just come in and run it day one. Not that it can't happen. It's just going to be a much tougher hill to climb in terms of really developing that trust. In my case, I came in before I was the CEO and came alongside the founder.
Into the CFO role?
Yeah,
right?
into the CFO role and worked together for a number of years. So that trust had to be developed, and a lot of things had happened where I had to prove myself, not only the things I was talking about in terms of being genuine and transparent and what my passion really was about, but also performing. I could say all the things I wanted to say, but if I wasn't producing results, what's the point? So that was all laid down before I had full control of the leadership of the company. So to come in, I think, unless there was some long relationship with that person already, that's gonna be difficult. Now, I know there's probably families that can be in that role. Hopefully, a lot of the families you deal with have some time to plan that succession. Hopefully, they can build that trust with somebody and understand how that's actually going to play out for both sides, because the person coming in too has to learn who these people are really and how they operate, what they want, what they're passionate about. So and what's really driving them and what their fears are and what they're afraid of and all that stuff. So it took me some years to really figure that out and to be able to speak to that to the family.
Was into that CFO role as the chief financial officer, back working then with the founder who's sitting in the CEO chair.
Yeah.
Was there that succession plan from almost day one, though, of saying, David, this is a possibility of you taking over someday, but you're going to have to do this? Or did that just evolve over time?
Yeah, I think what happened is when I came in, it was maybe the typical, here's an entrepreneur, really just lots of energy, lots of ideas, could build lots of things, but didn't really know how to make them work and make profit.
Okay.
So lots of assets, lots of things going on, but no money.
Gotcha.
So here I come in, I can figure out how to make it make money.
Right,
We'll take what you've got and let's actually make it profitable and let's actually build value.
Yeah.
So that was something that I think he was looking for help with that, whether he really knew it or not. Because actually, when I came in, he thought he had lots of money. And we found out that there really wasn't any money, kind of thing. But so and
asset rich, cash poor.
Absolutely, yeah. And so that was a real defining moment that was really up to him. And I speak to families and founders on this, where he decided, look, I want to be the person in charge. I want this to be about me.
Yeah.
But I'm going to allow somebody to have influence on me in terms of how we go forward, because I really want to be successful.
Yeah.
Or I want this to move on. And he talked a lot about legacy and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that's not something I could control. I mean, obviously who I was had an influence on whether he felt comfortable doing that, but he had to decide that. And to his credit, he did.
Yeah.
And I knew a lot of people in his position that could never do that. So that's just something somebody has to decide. Now, of course, you need the right person, but it's never perfect. I mean, he and I argued a lot,
Right.
and had a lot of rough patches along the way. But like a marriage, we figured it out.
Yeah.
But that was something that really gave us the opportunity then to go fix it, and for him to not worry so much about always being right or always having it be about him, but he really wanted to get better.
Yeah, which is, it's just fascinating in the moment as I'm listening to you, because at Clearwater Capital, we look at ourselves as the chief financial officer back to the family. And you're talking about being the chief financial officer inside of the business, right? And that business creates this asset that's a huge value back to the family. And then how does the family look at that, right? So we're not into the business operations and the details that you bring to it, but sitting in the chair that we do with the family, it's very much of the same description that you just provided, right? The family has to decide, well, what is most important? Do I want to get better at the way I'm thinking about my family enterprise, not the business operation itself, but what does this mean? How am I developing the subsequent generations, right? Whether it be the kids, the grandkids, how am I thinking about how this wealth creation could be used for good, right? Or could do damage. And it could be a double-edged sword and how that plays itself out. How do I think intentionally about where I'm giving to, right? What I'm supporting, the philanthropic, the charitable, the generosity component of this conversation. So having that alignment, but there's also a saying that we use often, which is we can't want this more for someone than they want it for themselves.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what I heard you say in different words regarding, well, no, this is where the family, as successful as they were from the world's eyes, there's aspects of it that was asset rich, cash poor, where it could be run much more effectively and efficiently, and all the things that you could bring back to that family. And that's the same role that we look at and go, okay, but the family's got to decide, this is what I want to engage in. And also, what do they know and what do they not know, right? And in that case, the family recognized, I don't know what you can bring to me in the operation, in the business, Dave. So I need you to come alongside, and how are we going to grow this together? And that alignment, and it sounds like the mutual respect as well.
Yeah, there has to be a mutual respect, and both sides have to be self-assured and confident who they are,
right?
Because the fear starts to creep into it, where the family's thinking, well, maybe this person might take it in some direction that doesn't represent us well, or they're going to try to take it over, or they're going to get people on their side that then don't no longer look up to us. And what's going to happen here? And whose business is this going to become?
Right.
You have to go into it feeling a little more confident in that what you do as the founder or family and what you do as the executive coming in will speak for itself. And it doesn't really matter what the accolades are or aren't, but that, in the end, you're going to get to where you want to go.
Now, is there natural frustration that comes in? I mean, that you're doing all this work, you're creating the wealth back for the family that's the owners and the founders. You're looking at it going, but I'm the one, figuring out how to make money here and what I'm building. And again, not from the ego, because that's the danger that comes into place. But is there a point of frustration that comes in when you're working back with a family to make them wealthier, and yet you're feeling the burden, the jealousy, the whatever it might be, right? Is there any emotions that come in that way?
Fortunately, I was mentored by another owner and CEO of a large privately held company, and when I was young, and I learned a lot about that very thing because we went through a lot of asset sales, and I saw how people felt about things, where they felt like, well, I should have gotten a lot more of that windfall because I worked here for 20 years. And I really developed a perspective early on, which was, look, if you take your capital and you put it at risk and you create something, that's the way the game works. It's okay. You get the potential reward, different than someone who comes in and gets a guaranteed salary or bonus or whatever it is. Now, obviously, the more impact you have on a business, the more you want to be aligned with the ownership. So for me, and I owned 2 businesses prior to doing this work with this person, part owner and co-founder of a couple of businesses. So I saw it from that side too. So getting in there, my goal was always in the beginning, hey, look, I just want to be aligned. If this bombs and we go nowhere, I'm fine if I make nothing. I'm not looking for guarantees. I want to get paid something for the day-to-day work, but I always took a below market salary, and everything was just tied to the cash that we were generating and the value we were creating for the company itself. And so, if it didn't work out, it was going to be a lot of wasted years for me. And they knew that. That was okay.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, I wanted a real stake in this.
Yeah.
And so, again, that didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen the first day coming in. But as I brought other executives in, at certain levels, I wanted them aligned the same way and brought them into a similar kind of program so that it was that's how it was. But again, people I trusted and people I knew and all that. But it worked very well in our case.
So for the families and being like very specific, right? So if somebody's listening and they're taking down notes right now and saying, okay, here are the characteristics of the non-family member CEO that I'm looking for. I heard, don't bring them straight into the CEO chair, right? Bring them in their training and development, making sure that their incentives are aligned. These are the green items of the positive characteristics that I'm hearing you say. Yeah. And then some of the red flags. What would be the red flags that would be out there if that family is seeking a chief executive?
Well, I think a big one is, can they keep everything private with you in terms of their frustrations and what's going on? A lot of times, before I was CEO, there was other people who had leadership roles there that were there before I came in.
Okay.
And they openly complained about the founder. They openly complained about the family. And I'm not saying they were wrong in terms of what their frustrations were. I think they were pretty accurate, but they were spreading kind of a division into the business because they just bothered them so much. I think number one, you can't have somebody who isn't secure enough to keep it to themselves and to work it out with the family or with the founder or whoever that is. It's very important. So, I could go home and be very frustrated about how the founder was behaving or what his thoughts were on something, but I wasn't going to go into the office and let that come out or let that show.
Yeah.
I always had to protect him in a sense with the staff. Yeah. And so, but I also had to be free to go in and talk to him and be honest about what I thought. Yeah. And that's very important. So you got to have somebody who has that security. This isn't like, hey, the founder disagrees with me and this person's not going to be able to handle that. Yeah. You're not the same people. So I knew right away that this guy operated in a way that wasn't the way I operated. We both were big risk takers, which was really good. Yeah. I think that's important. If the entrepreneur or the founder is a real risk taker, you do want a CEO or a leader, somebody who's also a risk taker.
And what about the flip side of that? If somebody's really conservative, if they having somebody a bit more conservative alongside them?
Yeah, I think you want to be aligned with that for sure. Yeah, I don't know how it would work if you were both on opposite ends of the spectrum,
Yeah.
if the CFO or CEO was always saying no,
Yeah.
but not doing anything else, but just saying no, and the founder, always wanted to go somewhere and we couldn't get there, or the founder wanted to stay in a lane, but the CEO was frustrated and wanted to try all these new things.
Yeah.
That's going to create a lot of stress.
Tension and stress, and then inertia, and things aren't going
Yeah.
to get done at all. So then for individuals that might be candidates to be working for a family, for families pursuing them, they bring in a technical expertise to them. What are the areas that you'd encourage those individuals to be seeking out, their mindset, they're checking the ego at the door, all those sort of things? What would you encourage those candidates out there?
Well, I think they have to get to know who the family is, who the founder is. Not just, hey, I see your business, I see what you're doing, I'm great, I can come in, I can do all kinds of things. We're going to make the assumption that you can do what you say you can do. Yeah. So now it's, can we live together? I mean, we always say this, you spend more time at work sometimes than you do in your marriage, especially during your working years. And so it's very true. I mean, you just have to be able to know, can we talk about things? Can we argue about things with no love lost and move on?
Yeah.
That's not going to be something you're going to figure out in just a couple of interviews, but a candidate should really be trying to feel that out. And if they're just not worried about that, they just want to know, hey, you're going to let me do my job, and how much am I going to have, and what are my resources, and all that stuff, which are important,
right?
But not really focusing on, can we live together as, almost like as in a marriage. I think you're taking a chance for sure.
So I want to get very, into the minutia here for a moment, because you talk about financial capital, talk about wealth creation, talk about compensation. You alluded to the fact of, below on base, but I want my incentive tied to the growth and the cash and the,
right.
execution of the sale of the company. How do you have that dance, right? When is the right time? How do you approach that? How do you be sensitive to it so the family doesn't feel like you're reaching into their pocket, right, in terms of trying to pick their pocket? And at the same time, you're also being honored in what you're bringing, and that's getting reflected. How much is based on trust versus how much is based on contract?
Well, I think you have to prove yourself. You just do. Now, depending on who you're bringing in and what they've already proven and where they are in their career life cycle, all that stuff, maybe less has to be proven or more has to be proven. But you have to, as the candidate coming in, you have to make investments into being able to have that dance one day or that conversation one day. And it's okay that that's what you want ultimately. In fact, you should want that. Otherwise, how hard are you really going to work for this thing? So I didn't beat myself up about having that be my objective. But in the beginning, it wasn't about that. It was like, look, just come in, start fixing this thing. Okay, if I feel I'm underpaid, that's fine. I'm going to make that investment. I'm just going to perform. I'm just going to make it obvious that I'm here to get to where we want to go. That's my goal. That's my main reason for being here.
Yeah.
I want to get to work. I want to fix stuff. Let's go, and then actually do it.
Yeah.
That part can't be left out.
Yeah.
We can talk about all kinds of strategies and ways to make it work, but if you can't perform and you can't get the results, that's a hard conversation to have.
Yeah.
So fortunately for me, it worked out that way to where then when I went, and I was the one who brought this up, saying, look, we need to be aligned, because now we're starting to split a little bit where, I'm being rewarded, but you don't feel like, you're getting the reward, and we got to stop that. So I came with the plan. I came with the design. We brought in a third-party consulting firm to kind of look it over and bless it and say it works and that's good for him. And, I didn't just try to convince him in private to sign up something. And, it made sense because he knew, well, one, I want this guy, and two, he can do the job, and he's going to support me and some of my ideas, and, he's going to come alongside me and all that, and I can trust him and all that. So that stuff was already established. So that dance, when you go in and you start talking about that, it's not as offensive, but it's still a conversation.
Still a conversation, but the proving yourself, right? There is the trust and going, okay, when we get to that point, I want to have this conversation. But in the meantime, let me go prove myself so I have my results, not my historical results, but my actual results with you, with the family in delivering, which comes back to going into the CFO role first, that building over time.
Right.
in order to earn the right to have that conversation,
Yeah.
not demand the right to have that conversation.
Absolutely.
So you earn that right to have the conversation. Then you just mentioned bringing in a third-party compensation consultant. How important was that to maintain the health of the relationship between you and ownership, to be able to point to a third party, to have that objectivity, that independence, the voice that they were bringing to it, both from a technical, because that's what they do on a day-to-day basis, but also from a relational, where it's not you versus them, but you have this third party to point to. I mean, was that important? Was that right out of the gate of saying, yep, this is the way we're going to do this in order to maintain that? Help listeners get inside your mind, because you presented it that way, of how that worked.
Yeah, I think it's very important. I think it's important to have an outside party that is professional and respected and has the expertise to comment on it. And if they're good, they're going to get to know the situation. They're not just going to come in with a bias about what it should be. And this company did that, and they felt, hey, yeah, you better get this guy aligned with you. You know, you need this kind of thing. And so I didn't handpick them to say that or anything. It was, come on in. And I had to show enough confidence in myself that I wasn't worried if a third party came in.
Right.
You want your own attorney for something, you want your own consultant for something, that's fine.
Yeah.
I'm okay, because I know I'm confident in what it is I'm proposing. So that brings comfort in and of itself. And that's what happened. You know, they took a look at everything, where we were already now starting to head. And like I said, I had obviously done a lot already. I'd brought a lot of capital partner firms in, banks. We were in a much better position than before I got there. So, you know, it wasn't a super hard sell. It was just, okay, what's it going to look like?
Right.
But if I hadn't done all that, I don't know how that conversation would have went.
Well, so now I want to go back to where we started the conversation. Because again, I think some people listening out of the gate in this, you know, the last half hour here, the fruit of the spirit, right? The kindness, the gentleness, you're supposed to walk into business. The wrong perception, what I'm hearing from you, is that you roll over on everything, that you're going in, and the kind thing is to step back and show deference in every situation. That's not what you're saying at all. So how do you juxtapose those items of saying how you're approaching what you're doing, and bringing the hardness, the grit, the intentionality, the business decision making of that? How, those things can live together. I mean, do you agree? And that's what I'm hearing, but how do you maintain those in balance with one another? Right? How do you challenge, but doing it in a loving manner?
Well, first of all, yeah, I do agree with what you're saying and how you're asking the question. Christ is our example. It's really simple. Like, a lot of times we're trying to figure out how to do things or what it's supposed to look like. We have the example. We have God's word. We have his character. We have what he's about. We have what he's trying to achieve. We see how Christ operated, in a sense, in his life and what he did. And I don't think anywhere he just rolled over if there wasn't a reason to roll over. And there wasn't a lack of confidence in what he was doing, or passion, or anything, or even, how well he did it. So in all things, I think we want to operate at the highest level of excellence possible. That's honoring.
Yeah.
Just, again, are we feeding our ego, or are we just trying to honor God with that? It's a constant battle. I constantly have to check myself in that.
Yeah.
So, in terms of how you do both, it's not hard to go ahead and try to get great results, to be successful, to do things at the highest level of quality and excellence that you possibly can, and to get those around you to buy into that as well, and do that in what they're managing or what they're doing as a task. So there can be a lot of joy in that. But at the same time, if you're not walking around with some joy, with showing some peace and gentleness and kindness in the midst of doing that together, then it doesn't work. It doesn't make any sense. And so there's no reason working hard and being very good at what you do can't bring joy and peace and gentleness in your walk with Jesus. It's fine. It's just, it's about why you're doing it. Because if you're trying to feed your ego, and if you're trying to build a name, and you're trying to get generations of things to follow after you that look up to you as kind of the beginner of all that stuff, you're going to get very stressed when things aren't working out.
Right.
You're going to get very stressed if something's going wrong, or if people aren't following you or listening to you, because You're trying to build something that's very fragile and isn't going to last. If that's not the goal of what you're doing, you don't get that worked up about how it happens or how it unfolds or where there's bumps in the road, because it's okay. It's okay. And being successful and big and wealthy and all that in and of itself it doesn't need to be an objective.
Right.
There's nothing that says that's what you have to do.
Yeah. Back to, if that's what you defined as the end, then the means, right, where people, can take all kinds of means to get there. Back in my GE days, right, there was just the saying, right, having a hard head for business and a soft heart for people. It's a little bit what I'm hearing as well. And then it depends, because the receiver, right, I might be the sender, and I've been accused of this in the past, right, is how hard as I try, right? I do have a soft, at least I like to believe, right? I've got a soft heart for people, but I have a really hard head for business. And sometimes that hard head, might get in the way of my heart for people. How do you maintain those things in check regarding, well, no, here's a decision we need to make. Everyone's going to have to just, buck up and let's go forward. How do you maintain that in balance of saying, I still want to care for people, and at the same time, there's some really hard things that we've got to deal with, and performance issues, and, firing customers, firing clients, firing employees. There's really hard things that have to be done at times. It doesn't mean you have not have a soft heart for people. How do you keep those things in balance?
Yeah. And part of that, you have to develop over time, and people have to start to trust you that where is your heart in this? So if you're being strong and you're being forceful about something, that's not taking away for the love you have for somebody at the same time. So it's kind of like being a parent, so you have your kids, right? If you're forceful about something and saying, look, at the end of the day, we're not going to argue about this. We can talk about it, but in the end, we're not going to argue. Here's where we're going. I want you to do it in this manner because that's the right way to do it, and behave this way, whatever. You're going to be forceful, but there's no love lost. I mean, as they grow, the way that happens is different. Obviously, they become more and more their own person, but it's the same thing. So look, it's almost like a family dynamic. Here's the people I'm working with. Here's the people I'm trying to influence. Let's go. Let's do this together. And again, that's not always easy. It took several years to even get the right people into that mix. There was failures and rehires and firing, But once you can kind of have that, where people kind of were strong enough themselves, they were confident enough people that they realized, look, he's not belittling me. He's not trying to cut me down. We're just trying to get to the same place. And in the end, we can have this kind of forceful argument, but later on, it's okay. It's like we're family. It's not a big deal. I don't have to worry about being fired every time we're having a disagreement. I'm good with disagreement. Come on in. Let's have it out. It's okay.
Right.
And then let's get to where we're going. Let's get to work. So it's what we're here for. And we can have other things wrapped up in that, but in the end, let's achieve the things that we've set out as the good things to achieve. And I think we can enjoy that process, and still love each other. It's like a team. It's like anything. And I know that sounds a little pie in the sky, but that's kind of what we developed and created. And then that got influenced out throughout the organization. It usually starts at the top, and you have to be consistent in that, So there was at some point where they all believed that I wasn't trying to feed my ego, and I wasn't making it about me, but I was making it about the result.
Right. Well, and before we get into your family a little bit, right, and how you try to live that out at home as much as you do in the office, you alluded to that the founder, the CEO, this individual you'd been in business with and putting in the best hours of your day to create this and create this wealth, ended up passing relatively suddenly and prematurely at a young age. Can you share a little bit more about just what transpired in that, and then also, I mean, how do you plan for something like that? Not sure you can, but then what happens immediately after when life takes a huge right turn?
Yeah, it was sudden. It was unexpected. It wasn't planned for. I think we were just fortunate from a business standpoint, not talking about the human aspect of this person passing away, but from a business standpoint and from a wealth preservation standpoint, that I was already the president of the company at that point. He had already moved his residence into Texas, and we were in Illinois. The headquarters was in Illinois. So I was already running the business day to day. He was still obviously involved in the growth side and some of that stuff and coming up every so often. But the fact that he passed did not break down the company in that immediate
And how many
moment.
years into your relationship and working together were you at this point?
We were about 11 years into it at that point. So it had been a while.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so a lot of things were in place. The vested partners that we had from a capital standpoint, or even from a minority ownership standpoint, I already had relationships with. Everything was okay. And I was basically handling everything on a day-to-day basis already. So we were in an okay position from that regard. At that point, it became more for me to actually start thinking about some of those bigger ideas and more of the real growth of the business and things like that. And how do we keep creating more and more value?
Yeah.
And having to find some other people to actually maybe run the business on a day-to-day basis. So that changed that aspect, but the family was very comfortable with what happened, with me being in place, not with what happened, but with me being in place. And we were able to be okay.
And so others out there that may have their businesses, grown their businesses, maybe they're thinking about family succession, outside succession. How much time do you think for founder CEOs currently out there, should they be intentional about this succession concept? Because who knows how life plays itself out for this individual.
I mean, they should be thinking about it all the time. I mean, if you have something of value that you are trying to preserve, there always has to be a backup. I mean, there has to be. And it may not, in your mind, it may not be as good as you. It may be, it may not be, but it's okay. There has to be something. There has to be some plan. And if you don't see, as an owner, you don't see anything in place that can do that, that needs to be a priority. It just has to be,
And that's running the business. So then I go back to, putting my hat on, back working with the families, the CFO side of the family. What about within the family? Because all of a sudden you end up with the business is going, you're doing great with that. You have to interface back with the family because you're representing them. They're the majority owners in this. What did you observe that was taking place, maybe within the family dynamics, how they were processing things in their relationship as owners, back with you now being the lead operator? Yeah,
it was tough because they weren't very involved with the business. And so they cared about it, and of course knew about it, but they had their own lives. So getting them comfortable with some of the things they now needed to pay attention to, like the financial health of the business, any legal problems, what's going on, where they had a liability, that kind of thing. Understanding that, because they never really had to understand it before. That was tough because a lot of it was just something they weren't familiar with, what it all meant. And so it was the same thing as kind of with the compensation setup, was getting some third-party counsel for them, somebody that they could be close to, could advise them, could interpret some of this stuff in a way that they felt comfortable about. They trusted me. Obviously, that was a huge part of it. But at the same time, they didn't understand what I was really talking about. They just didn't know.
Right.
I could say, hey, this is something you need to worry about, or something. This isn't something you don't need to worry about. If they had somebody who was maybe more unbiased and uninvested saying, yeah, I think that makes sense, then okay. So I was good. Wanted them to have that as well. And so there was kind of a trusted intermediary in that sense, who had a real business sense, but at the same time, didn't matter to them what happened at Road Ranger. Just they were looking out for the family. Did you have much
relationship or interaction with the broader family before he had passed?
A little bit, yeah. So the founder and I, spent a ton of time together. So I'd even go out to his place in Texas and be there for a few days because we'd have business in Texas. But I'd stay at his house. So I knew the family to an extent. It wasn't a lot, but it was there. And so after he passed, actually made an effort to spend more time together. He had 2 daughters, and include them in things and keep them involved in the conversations for a while, and make sure that if they had any concerns, I was there to talk to them about it and not bypass any of that. So some of that had to be done. But in the end of it, I think they wanted to keep living their life. And not have to worry about the business, because it was never something they were involved with to begin with.
What are some of maybe the topics that came up into this CEO operator, right? You're running the business here. That's the focus. But the respect and the care back for the family and ownership in that way and your responsibility to them. What are like some of the topics that you got involved with or that came up that you'd be like, yeah, wasn't expecting that. This is something wasn't part of the job description. You can never build it in, but it's the nature of working with closely held private businesses and families.
Yeah. I mean, there was quite a few of those. So, dealing with the founder who was in it, we'd have conversations. You just took things for granted. Everybody understood what was going on. When I started having conversations with the outside family after he had passed, things would come up that it just took me back. Like, why are we even talking about this? So it could be just the colors we were using in something or a way a sign looked, or because to them, they were trying to preserve the legacy of their father, their husband, whoever. And I was trying to just continue to move things along. And so I realized I had to be careful about things they were sensitive to that really didn't impact the business, but it was important to them.
Right.
Like, I remember working on that with him back in the 80s. And, so I had to kind of change my perspective on what my conversations needed to be and play, I don't mean play to that, but be conscious of that and be sensitive to that. So, when I went and did things that I needed to talk to them about, I already kind of had that in mind, saying, look, we're not going to touch this, want to preserve that. They were more concerned about that than really the stuff we might be concerned about with business. So understanding that, and that took a little bit of time.
But it's showing up then in a kind way, in a gentle way. Yeah. I mean, back to your point on here's what you want to live out and having that heart for people, especially in a time of grief. And when life got thrust upon them that they weren't asking for and didn't want in that scenario either. That how do you show up in that way and have the care and still be making the business decisions that needed to be made. And so as you move forward, you're no longer with the organization as that transpired. How did the dialogue play out from that point forward? Right. So early on, it may have been, various topics, but then you have to get, to the bigger strategic capitalization, legal. I mean, how did that then evolve in the dialogue as a little bit of time passed?
Well, as listeners may pick up on, once the founder passed, there was a lot of value there in the business. And so now a family that wasn't involved in the business, didn't live where we were headquartered, where we were conducting most of our business, now had 98% of their wealth tied up in this thing, but yet didn't know a whole lot about it. I felt it was important that they deal with that, that they just think about that. Should they liquidate? Should they take that? Not keep it at risk because it's all in one thing that they're not really controlling on a day-to-day basis at all.
Right.
And diversify that and go on. And, it was quite a bit of money. So we had those conversations, so how are we going to plan for that next stage? So, okay, how do I manage paying them what they need, getting the backers we need for that, whatever it is. And then how does that look moving forward? And we can move on and not have the boundaries of the things they're worried about. They're not worried about certain things anymore, and they can move on with their life. And not because I wanted them just out of my hair, but because I didn't think it made sense for them. That's something I would tell my best friend or whoever. It made me ought to think about preserving that at this point. So that started down a path, and we looked like that was what we were going to end up doing, but it didn't quite work out. I think family wanted to stay connected, which was a compliment to me, but I think was going to be difficult to do long term in terms of really being aggressive in continuing to grow the business. So we had an opportunity to sell, and I approached the family on that and just said, hey, look, I think we have a very high multiple right now, partly because of where the economy is and the industry is, but also because of our cash flow and kind of what's coming up in the future. And I think we can really leverage that. And I think there's people who are interested, and I think we ought to take advantage of that.
Yeah.
And the family was okay getting out if kind of I was getting out too.
Yeah.
And that's fine. So we went that route, and we ended up doing that. That was a bit of a process, but we got that done at the end of 2018. And after that, we stayed connected to a point, but we kind of both got on with our lives, and there was no love lost, and always checked in on each other. And continued to talk to them on the day of the passing of their husband and father, and kept that relationship. So
when several things come to mind. Tyler Beechler and I did an episode solely on the investing across the entrepreneurial life cycle, right? And most entrepreneurs have everything, right? All eggs are in one basket. How do you approach that? How do you strike balance in that over time? Whether it's a going concern, or you end up taking some chips off the table, or you have an outright liquidity event that comes to take place. But if I hear you correctly, there's an aspect of this where you had to put the family's interests above your own again, versus saying, wow, I could grow this, I could do certain things if you were the one to buy out the family or put together a capital pool to do that. And yet, if I understand correctly, you step back and said, but the right thing for the family here is to move forward for them to do this and not just continue it on.
Right.
How much did you have to wrestle internally to come back to saying, nope, the family's, ownership's interest, this is what their late, father or husband would have wanted from you, his business partner, in this way, in order to do this? Was that, did that really wear on you, or was that pretty clear out of the gate?
Yeah, it was a struggle. There was a part of me that was just frustrated because I knew what we needed to continue doing and where we needed to go and how we needed to get there. And we were in a great position to do that. So I was frustrated that it was more difficult than it needed to be, because there was other concerns they had that they were trying to protect that really, in my mind, weren't that important, but were becoming an impediment to doing the things we need to do. So it was probably born out of a little frustration, just in terms of being honest.
Yeah.
But ultimately, that discussion about not having all of their eggs in one basket, especially when they didn't understand the business, they weren't involved with the business, that was genuine, and I really felt like it would be a tragedy if they didn't do something in one way or another to take that off the table and preserve that, or at least a big portion of that. So that was very genuine. And I felt like, okay, ultimately, I think selling achieves that. It does the same for me, it's okay. And what I had to also wrestle with was my own ego, because, here I am running a $1 billion company, and, all of that and all that goes with it. And I'm dealing with other people like that and all that stuff. And I feel like, well, I can make it even bigger. I had to really have some quiet time on that and understand what was driving me for that. And I don't think it was all that healthy. I wasn't doing more of the good works I wanted to do. In fact, I was becoming busier. I was trying to justify making more wealth again, to do more good in the kingdom by giving more money to things. And really, in the end, I just didn't want to lose that identity at some level. That was part of it. So, I said, I gotta step out. If I can't do that in a way where I can maintain what it is I want to maintain as a person and as a follower of Christ. Some people can. I knew it was becoming a struggle for me, and I just didn't want to. The pictures I had of that, of people I knew that were, up in that stratosphere, they weren't good pictures. Not saying that's how it would have ended up, but I just didn't want to get caught in that and let it go, have that freedom. The money was not going to ever be an issue again, but at the same time, dealing with who I really am in Christ, who I'm going to be, what my purpose is going to be, and moving forward into that.
Garrett Swigert, who was a previous guest, and we were having this conversation, and he hit certain thresholds that earlier in his life, he was like, wow, if I got to this level, that would be it. And he got there and he's like, that's it. This is all I feel. He's like, talk about anticlimactic, right? And then it was like the next goal, and realized that's not the answer, right? Just the more, or the making the money or the wealth, the goal or the end, to justify the means, isn't an end at all, right? It's just a tool to be used in how you approach that. And you mentioned, right, you get a glimpse into, in terms of some of the circles you were running in, where the picture wasn't so pretty. I forget exactly how you just said it, right? But it wasn't a great picture. Help listeners understand a little bit that might be aspiring to that picture, right? That they see on, I don't know, Instagram or Facebook or whatever, right? They see that picture, it's idealized in their mind, but you're saying, yeah, you know what? I've seen behind the curtain. It's not so pretty. What is that not so pretty aspect that you that you've witnessed?
Well, I'm sure the listeners too have heard this before and maybe even know it themselves. I mean, that's just truth. All of that really doesn't bring happiness. And I hate saying that because you hear it all the time. But, and some people say to me, well, it's easy for you to say you have it all now. Go ahead and preach that.
Right.
When I have it, then we can talk about it.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's true. I mean, I think anybody who's reached any level of success or finances where they can kind of do what they want to do or live the kind of quality of life they want to live can understand that didn't just make their life great.
Yeah.
Yes, not having to worry about money is one less worry. I'm glad I don't have that worry. I'm so thankful, and I thank God for that. But it's one of 1,000 things. It's not the thing, and it will never be the thing. So if anybody really wants to hear anything from today, it's that you got to be doing it for the right reasons. And you and I have had this conversation before too. There's no one else that cares how much money you have. Nobody cares. They really don't. They don't care what you own. They don't care what you're running. They don't care how much money you have. They don't care how many generations you've created of wealth, and they don't care. And in fact, a lot of people are turned off by it. They don't want to hear about it. They actually might like you less because of it. I think if anybody's doing it because they think it's creating a legacy for themselves and purpose and drive just in and of itself of having all that, it's just not true.
Yeah.
And I think even most of these people know that deep down.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do about it? I mean, if you're enjoying what you're doing and that's what you want to do and everything's working out, that's great. But if you're doing it because you think it matters or people care or you've got to maintain that and you've got to be this person and all this stuff, you're trapped. I mean, you're just a prisoner, and that's just the truth. And even people I think who know that won't get out of it because that fear or that need for that is too strong. But that scared me. It scared me when I started feeling that way. And I can tell you now, being 6 years removed, oh my gosh, I would never go back to that. Yeah.
Sometimes it isolates, right? Where people
Very
either
much.
resent it or they're turned off by it or whatever, or the individual that is holding that wealth is getting skeptical about people, right? They're getting, they risk getting cynical about somebody always wanting them, some charity always saying, hey, you know what, we could take a bigger check, or hey, I got a great business idea, why don't you fund it? Everyone wanting from them, and it could end up being isolating in its own right and becomes a prison of going, you might have the biggest house in the world, but you're captive in that because relationally you've gotten isolated. And that's a hard place, right? And we've seen that play out. And again, none of these items are a fait accompli, that is going to be the way it works. But you have to be intentional and conscious of it, as you were in your decision-making of going, wow, I'm at risk of this too.
Yeah.
As much as I wanted to start out, life and the career and the work with this family, you weren't immune to the risks or that deceitfulness of wealth that can bring into it.
Yeah.
But then it has to be replaced. And you mentioned the word purpose. Talk a little bit about legacy, and we changed that to saying it's really having an impact, living a life of impact and making the world a better place. When you think about this term purpose, how do you think about its definition?
As a Christian, we've been given a purpose, and it goes back to, do we really believe it? Not do we just buy into it or try to have it be our motto, but do we really believe it? Do we really put our hope and trust in it? And there's a lot of days that I don't. I'd like to say that I do, and I have to catch myself on that and say, well, look, if I believe it, I should live it.
Yeah.
And so Christ wants his reward. He wants all the lost sheep. God wants to gather everybody back to him. And we know the battle will be won at the end of it all as a Christian. But what are we doing to help facilitate that? God's made it clear what his work is, his purpose is. We can join him anytime we want. We don't necessarily need to wait for him to tell us what to do or where to go work or should I leave my job? Should I stay at my,
Right.
He's made it clear, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'd like you to participate in. So get to it. And the only reason I don't sometimes is because I'm not really sure that it's worth the effort, in terms of where my faith is at. There's a lot of days I'm very, very sure of it. And my faith is very strong in that. And so that goes all back to, okay, why does that happen? Why do I have more faith one day and less the next, that are willing to put my trust in something or hope into something? Because I've unrooted myself from streams of living water, and I'm now on my own. I didn't even realize it. And I'm just kind of drying up and withering. So I got to get replanted, spiritual disciplines, whatever, however we do that, but living as part of the vine and not on my own. And these are all things you can do to test where your own barometer is on that.
Right.
But if I really believe it, then I should live it. So purpose for me, it's still about that. It's still, in the end, is that happening? And it doesn't mean I got to create the biggest foundation or I got to throw the most money at something, but am I salt and light?
Right.
Do I make an impact on people when I come into contact with them? Do they see something different? Do they see Christ in me? Then they can go out and do the same thing. Is their life going to be changed because of the way I'm modeling my life?
Right.
So for me, it's always been more about the modeling than the preaching or even the money. Money is needed. There's no question. It can help God's purposes, but I was putting too much faith in just, hey, more money's going to do more.
Yeah.
And yet I'm not really influencing anybody other than telling them about the money I'm putting into the kingdom.
Right.
And again, nobody really cared about that. I wasn't any different than anybody else. So that is what it is. It's being conscious of that. And in my activities, whatever it is I'm doing, if that's not happening, then my activities are fruitless.
Right. I was to transition into your family side of it. So I was speaking recently to a subsequent generation family member of a client. So she and her new family, and we have a new baby, and as they're thinking about all of their estate structure and tax planning and financial and how this comes into them, and her really, kind of digging in with us for the first time here, even though the broader family has been clients for some time. At the end of the conversation, I'm like, listen, everything's fair game, right? You can ask me whatever you want to ask. She's like, okay. She's like, so do your children come to you for financial advice? Do they have these conversations with you? And I loved the question because coming from her perspective, it's like, listen, if your kids aren't even listening to you, right? And it's like, well, thankfully, right? Yeah, all three of my kids and their families are clients, and brother-in-laws and sister-in-laws and mother-in-laws. And this is what we do for our extended families, let alone for the families that we turn around and serve, because those closest to us are the greatest judge in knowing our true colors, because families are interesting entities into their own right? And sometimes maybe you can fake it in the office or business, or sometimes you can fake it in the church pew, or sometimes you can fake it in a restaurant. But your family is going to know, and they're going to be the judge. So when you take all of what you're saying and you live it out in business and serving this other family and employees and stuff, how would you say this gets lived out then in the home? Like, what would your kids be saying if they were sitting here too and saying, yeah, okay, here's the other, here's my dad, right? Let's talk about him. How did that actually play itself out with the same intentionality of your belief system?
Yeah, I mean, I touched on it earlier where I talked about, in this case of an executive and a family, what's one of the ingredients that can make it successful, and self-confidence, self-assuredness is huge. I mean, it really is. I mean, we all have insecurities, but do you let those control you, or do you know how to manage through those, and not be afraid? And that was something I wanted in my children more than anything. I didn't necessarily want them to fill me with value and to make me feel good about myself. And I didn't have kids to have a purpose in my life. It was really to create, in a sense, warriors for the world. And I don't mean that just that they're tools, but that they become people that whatever path they want to go down, they feel confident. They're assured of who they are. They understand who they are. Hopefully that's in Christ. But even outside of that they have a sense of self-worth and self-esteem. And the best way I could do that was to model it and was to let them learn how to do it. So it's always the long game, in my opinion, with children. We're not always going to be friends. They're not always going to like me, but I think in the long run, they're going to understand that value and what I was doing, and always trying to be their parent versus being their friend. And so I think they would say that. And I have great relationship with all three of my children. And I was just on the phone last night with my son, who's in the finance world and going out on his own in an entrepreneurial way. And we talked for 45 minutes about making the right decision in his next move. And, you know, they come to me for all those things. And I'm not writing checks to solve their problem. And they're not looking for that from me. You know, they know I could, but that's not what they're looking for. They already understand who I am in that regard and what I want for them in their life. And it's not about me. It's not about, being grateful for what I can do for them, but having them become that person where they can take on the world. They're not afraid. They're okay. They can take care of problems. If things aren't working out, they're going to be capable to find a way out of it. They're going to know how to make a means for themselves. They're going to know how to fix relational issues. You know, that's to me the greatest result I can have with my family. And I don't need the credit or the accolades for it. I don't need them to tell them how much they think I'm great, or like how much money you made. You're great. No, you know, kids really don't care about that, right? It's how you're treating them and how you're loving them. And so that's how I love them. And I think they're really grateful for that they can have a father who's going to spend that time trying to help them get to that place, but letting them do it.
Right. And so we talk about impact and this legacy impact. And, you know, you and I, when we were, preparing for this conversation, we're talking about it more than financially. Because I do think a lot of people default to, well, what am I doing? What's my legacy when it comes to financial? What's my legacy when I think about estate documents or putting my name on the side of a building or whatever I'm funding, that ends up being a legacy type item. But as we discussed, right, legacy also gets into other buckets of capital, meaning what about human capital? What about intellectual capital and development, the social capital of the difference and the impact that you're making in the world, and the intentionality that's brought to the human and the intellectual capital in particular when it comes to your kids, but also when it comes to employees, people you come in contact with, business partners, whatever it is. How do you think about this human and intellectual capital development and growth, like people default to thinking about financial capital growth?
Yeah, we talked about it a little bit before too, just that, I mean, money has a place. Money can make things happen. There's no doubt. And if it's used wisely, that's great. Not against it at all, but it's just one small thing. And in and of itself, it doesn't change people. It doesn't change the world for the better. It doesn't change the world in a way that is all about God's purposes. In and of itself, it just never has and never will. I think it's important just to affect people, whether you call that the human capital or the social capital, who you are, again, going back to that, how you affect people when you're with them, what they see, what you're modeling, that spiritual fruit. I mean, everybody would love to have joy and peace and love and kindness and gentle. I mean, think if we all really,
how do you argue with that, right?
Yeah, really, we're that way. It wouldn't matter what we had. We have everything if we have that. So how you get that rarely is about having lots of money. I mean, in fact, I'd argue that makes it more difficult to get that. Some of the kindest, gentlest, most loving people I know have the least amount of money, so I'm not sure if that's a correlation or it just is coincidence. But so I think, it's developing that, helping people develop that, influencing that way, having an effect on them that way. But it all starts with ourselves. And so if we're not developing our own capital as a Christ follower or whatever, if we just want to be a good person in this world and make the world a better place, if we're not really that person, we're not going to really have a lot of influence. We're just not. And when we talk again about legacy, the way I defined it, and it might be a little bit incorrect, was like, I don't want to worry about having my name on anything. I don't want to worry about my kids managing my wealth or the things I want to accomplish with it or charities I want to help. It all sounds great. But as soon as it starts becoming that, for me, I'm just getting in the way of all this other stuff we're talking about. So I'm not free anymore, and I'm going down a path that isn't going to help me be free, let it go, and have the spiritual fruit be produced. And so I just don't want that in the way of anything. But yes, of course, I want to have an impact. And part of that is through my children becoming their own people that want to have an impact, and feeling confident that they can, because it all sounds great. But if somebody's very insecure, doesn't believe in themselves, hasn't practiced going out and trying to do things and failing and going out again and succeeding, it's never going to happen. And just not being net takers in the world, but net contributors to the world.
And so if I play back a little bit of an equation that I think I just heard you say, and then I'll turn it over to you for closing comments, right? If legacy equals impact, and the impact you're going to have on the people around you, the world at large, you can't have that impact without having influence in order to have the impact in the end. And you can't really have influence unless you're living out a life that is both technically, competent, I'll call it, right, of whatever it is that you find your hand at, whatever work you're doing it with excellence, but also that's the hard head for business. But then coming back to the heart for people, and it's the heart for people that earns the opportunity then to influence individuals because of what you're bringing, similar to your own, career track at the company, because you earned the right to have the conversation, right, about the compensation package, the promotions, all that kind of stuff. You first had to deliver on what you were doing to earn the opportunity then to have the influence to make a broader impact on the world around you. So in a real simplistic mathematical term, right? I mean, I look at that as a bit of a sequence there of how you have to approach it, which is focusing on yourself first. How are you developing yourself? How are you looking at your world, your belief systems? How are you living that out on a legitimate, sincere, authentic day-to-day basis, albeit imperfectly, and giving your best at whatever it is that you're finding yourself doing? That earns you the right then to have influence with others. That's what can lead to impact. That's what could lead to legacy. Is that fair?
I think it's very fair. And I think it's, again, depending on whether you're a Christian, you're not a Christian, that can mean a little bit different things, of course. But yes, it's very much about who is going to listen to us if they don't want to be like us. Right. There's so many people that do speak, that do preach, that do give messages or talk or try to influence. And yet if you got to know them, it kind of discredits a lot of what they're saying. And then there's others that are fully credible with what they're saying. But who are you attracted to when you see somebody? And it's my guess, it's probably those people who are humble, who are kind and gentle, confident, not afraid, warriors at the same time, but yet loving, and it's not about them. And they're not worried about them in that regard. And so that's the model that Christ gives us, right? So how do we get there? And we have to check that. And sometimes we can check it ourselves, but a lot of times you need others around you who can be honest with you. Yeah. Say, hey, are you seeing much spiritual fruit from me? And they're like, yeah.
And you have to be open to that. you have to be open to that too, right? If you actually want to improve, you're going to have to, invite it and be open to it. Yeah. And if you're not, maybe that's the first warning flag too.
I agree.
I've enjoyed this conversation. I know we could keep going for much longer, and we will separately with the mics turned off. But closing thoughts, words of encouragement, ideas, even as you've processed this conversation coming into today.
Yeah, I mean, I think we touched on a lot of great things and stuff that took me years to think about and work through, not only with myself and with God, but with others of like-mindedness. And so I very much appreciate what you're doing with this. I hope people get a lot out of it. I've listened to some of them, and it's been impactful to me. I think everybody just needs to kind of understand, and this was something I had to come to grips with, that legacy, wealth, because we so often attach it that way. And a lot of the clients you deal with, I'm sure that's one of the things that they have. We just have to really understand what that means, and how do we really, if we're worried about living on beyond our lifetime, why is that important? And who are we really trying to impact, as we move on in life? And I would just encourage people to come to grips with that honestly, whether it's a healthy reason or an unhealthy reason. And if it's unhealthy, to let it go, to try to let it go and be free. As soon as I let that go, it wasn't just a spiritual energy that came back to me. And it wasn't even just a mental energy. It was also a physical energy. There was a huge weight that came off and just giving it to Christ and letting it go. And I hope people will give that a try if they don't feel they're in that place.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, David, for joining. Thank you, listeners, for taking this time. And if you want to continue the conversation, please email us at clearconversations@ccpwealth.com. Have a blessed day.